welcome to Music Mania. I am your host, King Crusoe, but you can call me KC. This week, there's once again several albums that we've got to get to, a new EP as well, and fortunately for me, just a handful of singles once again to not, lengthen this video a little bit more than I would like for it to go. But just as I hinted at, there are several albums to get to, so let's just go ahead and jump right on into all of those, starting off with a more underground pick, or one that probably most of you don't know about. This one was another one shouted out to me by Just an Illusion down here. He commented on one of my posts here on Musicboard and recommended me this album, and I gotta say, Rumor was a fun listen. I think the first half of the album is definitely a lot stronger than the back half, not least because the front half is a little bit more in the line of like something like what Throne would do with their 2024 album. A lot of that kind of hardcore energy. It was really enjoyable for that reason. As you get to about halfway through the album, you realize that half these songs start to become a little bit more instrumental. They're also a little bit slower, softer, not as much in the hardcore direction. Still enjoyed the album overall, but the front half of the album is so much stronger than the back half. But I enjoyed those first few songs, like Curtains and Rumor especially. Those two tracks were great, and I enjoyed those enough to give this one a 3.5 out of 5. And I forget what day I listened to this, so I'll just go ahead and change all that later like I normally do and say I recommend Rumor. I'm just now realizing that that sounds like the word rumor, even though it's spelled different. Funny how reading words aloud sometimes can help you realize what they sound like. Next up is going to be Jinjer's new album. Jinjer is a band that I have a really strange relationship with, all things considered, and that is because I've never really enjoyed them a lot. I've not really dug deep into their material a ton. There are certain decisions that they make with the musicality and also vocal wise that don't always sit with me perfectly well. In fact, while listening to Duel here, I was thinking that Jinjer kind of reminds me, or at least how I feel about Jinjer is similar to I feel like there are plenty of people who feel about Periphery, who's one of my favorite bands, but I totally understand why some people wouldn't like the particular musical decisions they do, or furthermore, why some people wouldn't necessarily enjoy Spencer Sotelo vocals. They're pretty standout, they're pretty unique. Tatiana's vocals, is that her name, Tatiana? I have a character in one of the books that I'm writing called Tatiani, I think. So I forget which is which. Either way, the vocalist for Jinjer is kind of that way for me. Good vocals, very talented, skillful, but not necessarily always for me necessarily. I don't always enjoy necessarily what's going on in the musicality as well. But I did come to enjoy Duel. I think the back half of the album is so much stronger than the front half. Tumbleweed might be my favorite song on here, but everything from Kafka through the end, aside from Fast Draw, which is just okay, but otherwise the last half of the album is just spectacular. So even though I came into this expecting basically to not enjoy it to any significant capacity, I came out enjoying it quite a lot, really. I surprisingly recommend Duel. If I could spell that right, actually put a U instead of another E there. There we go, review that album. Like I said, it's one that I wasn't expecting to enjoy nearly as much as I ended up enjoying it. Next up is going to be Death Mask 3 by Darko, and Darko is quite well known in the metal community for all of the various things they've released over the last few years, but the one or two tracks that I've heard over the years have just kind of been meh. I was assured by a friend that Death Mask 3 was fine to listen to without listening to the first two Death Masks musically, so I went ahead and did it since it was a new release and I didn't want to do the homework of listening to all the other Darko stuff, and Death Mask 3 basically confirmed my opinion on Darko as a whole, that I wasn't sure they would be for me. This album wasn't really for me. I don't particularly like it. It's not anything incredibly offensive, but it's something that just doesn't really work for me. I don't know why the particular musicality from this group here doesn't work, but something about it just doesn't click. So I do not recommend Death Mask 3, and I'm pretty sure I normally say I don't recommend, so I'm going to go ahead and fix that. Review album. So there's that one. I know I'm just kind of full of hot takes here with Jinjer, or at least my general opinion of Jinjer as I expressed it, and Death Mask. Next up is the last album for the week that we're going to be talking about in this section. That is Parasomnia by Dream Theater, about 4 years after their previous album. And the first thing I'm going to say about Parasomnia is that I like it a decent bit better than A View from the Top of the World, or whatever the 2021 album was. I kind of have to credit Dream Theater with being the band that basically got me into prog metal, because I always forget the title of the album, and I just looked at it a few minutes ago. The 2019 album, the one that has Pale Blue Dot or whatever on it. The 2019 album that these guys put out is arguably what got me into the genre. It's what made me interested in some of the musical ideas on display, and therefore I was able to branch out from there into other things. And I more or less got into Periphery because of Dream Theater, which in a way is kind of strange to me, but even so, that's what happened. I'm not nearly familiar enough with Dream Theater to really provide some hard comparisons about Parasomnia here. In fact, I couldn't even properly compare it to either of the last two albums, being the only other Dream Theater albums I've listened to. But I liked Parasomnia a good bit, actually. I was pretty surprised by it. I don't know whether it's a full 4-star or if it's just 3.5. All ratings are subject to change here, but I will say I recommend Parasomnia review album. There we go. Oh, and if any of you guys don't know, I actually write reviews on Musicboard here of all the albums and EPs that I talk about every week. So if you're interested in reading any of that, reading a little bit more concise and more proper, I guess, thoughts on any of the albums that I cover in this series, you can go ahead and check out my Musicboard profile in the description below. After I record these videos every week, I go ahead and do that. But now we're going to talk about EPs, and once again, there's one EP to talk about this week, and that is Towards the Light by Impending Doom. I don't know why they chose to release 3 singles ahead of time when there was only going to be 5 songs on the full release. Decision that I don't fully get, especially when 2 of them dropped at the same time, but I think that Towards the Light is pretty decent. I enjoyed Punishment and Snakes and Saints as singles a decent bit. The full track listing here totally works for what it is and what it's trying to achieve, but I think the best song on here, easily hands down, is Will You See God, and that song makes the 4 others worth it. It actually makes the entire EP worth it. It takes it from being a pretty general 3-star affair to easily being 3.5 stars all on its own. And even for somebody who doesn't love the slower paced, more chuggy side of deathcore, I prefer things that generally fall in a slightly different realm. This one still managed to really satisfy and to hold my attention the whole way through. So I actually recommend Towards the Light, and we'll call that the review for the EP. And now we're going to move into singles for the week. House of Light by Rivers of Nile is what we're going to start off with here. This is my first foray into anything Rivers of Light, and I enjoyed it a good bit. I'm excited for the album, and I actually kind of want to check out more of these guys' backlog at some point if I ever have time for it, because this track was pretty solid. In fact, what definitely struck me the most about House of Light was the prog metal influence that happened in there. I wasn't expecting there to be any real clean stuff or any strong or standout melodies or anything like that, but there definitely was a lot of that in there, and I enjoyed that quite a bit, so I'm looking forward to hearing more from these guys. Next up is No Loss, No Love by Spiritbox, and, well, I can't say I'm quite as hype on this one as literally everybody else seems to be. I enjoy it quite a bit, but it's not my favorite Spiritbox song at all. I'll say, I think even Soft Spine I enjoy more than this one for whatever reason. That's probably going to be a hot take in its own way. Still looking forward to the full album because Spiritbox with The Fear of Fear, is that what the last EP was called? That EP actually really worked for me in a way that Eternal Blue definitely did, and Spiritbox is very hit or miss with me. When I say hit or miss, I actually mean that literally. Plenty of hits, plenty of songs that I absolutely love, but then all of the rest of them I just don't really connect to. The Fear of Fear EP actually struck the hit with 5 of the 6 songs or something like that. However many tracks there are, almost all of them actually really clicked for me. Looking forward to another full album of these guys to see if it works any better than Eternal Blue did. I certainly hope so, because Eternal Blue is a big disappointment for me personally, aside from 3 or maybe 4 songs on it. Next up is Imminence's Death Shall Have No Dominion, another song that I think is just fine compared to the reaction that it's been getting from basically everybody else. Imminence going a little bit more of a deathcore route was super interesting and fun, but I don't necessarily think it's what I personally want from this band. I thought The Black was also pretty good, but not as good as everybody else was making it out to be. I think these guys' best album was it the 2019 album? Was that when it was released? Something about Towards the Light or something like that. I enjoyed these guys a little bit earlier. I also enjoyed their sort of remaster re-release that they did of the 2014 album more than the direction that this song is taking them or whatever. Interested to see more from these guys for sure. I'm definitely not discounting that, but I'm not nearly as hype on this single as a lot of people on YouTube seem to be. I definitely need to hear it in context of a full album, although judging by this album art, actually, off the top of my head, this might be like, I don't know, a deluxe edition bonus track or something for The Black. I can't tell, but it looks like it has that kind of style on the album art going there, so who knows? I don't know. I thought it was good and interesting, like I said, but not as outright amazing as I kind of wanted it to be given expectations. Trail Breaking by 4 Seconds Ago is the last new release single we'll talk about this week, and this song is better than either of the other two singles so far, actually. I enjoy it quite a bit. I'm going to give it 4.5 stars for being instrumental music. This track was a vibe for me, a vibe and a half even. Really enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to an album because I can never go wrong, really, with any of these particular songwriters and anything that they do, and the instrumental side of stuff I enjoyed just to be able to have to write stuff too, so I'm looking forward to the full album for sure. But next we're going to move into my personal listens, things that I listened to over the past week that weren't necessarily brand new releases. First up, we're going to talk about Super Zero by Samurai Pizza Cats. Even though this song came out several months ago, for whatever reason my Spotify tried to tell me this came out like this last Friday. I don't know why, but I listened to it again and was like, wait a minute, I've listened to this song already, but the song's great, so I decided to just go ahead and finish listening to it. If you enjoy the more fun side of metalcore, for example, something along the lines of what Electric Callboy is doing, Samurai Pizza Cats is great, which is also ironic because their guitarist, is it Daniel? I forget for sure, but one of the members of Electric Callboy, this is a side project for him. It's really great. The vocalist for this band as well is really, really stand out. The music video for this video is pretty funny too, so check that out if you want. I recommend this song for sure, especially if you're a fan of Electric Callboy. Next up, we're going to talk about Dancing in the Flames by The Weeknd, because of course I did listen to Hurry Up Tomorrow, the brand new album, last week, and decided to give this song a shot because I didn't realize that this was like a pre-album single that wasn't even on the album. And yeah, I can see why it wasn't on the album, because the straight song itself, Dancing in the Flames, is just kind of okay. Normally I would just go through and select only the single version of the song and not even review singles, but I am going to review this here because I want to talk about acoustic as well. You'll notice the average rating on here is much higher for the acoustic than the original, and there's actually good reason for that. I'm going to give this a solid like 3-star here. The regular song Dancing in the Flames is like maybe 2.5 star or something like that. It's a fine song, but it doesn't fully work for me in the end. The acoustic version is much better though, and easily more along the lines of being like a 3.5 star, something along the lines of what I would expect from The Weeknd, at least in this like 2020s version of The Weeknd. Yeah, so the song's fine, but I figured I would just talk about it in this context because I did go back and listen to it ahead of After Hours. But speaking of The Weeknd, I actually went back and re-listened to the other two albums as this trilogy. First, I checked out Dawn FM, even though I listened to this one twice, actually. I went back and listened to this, then After Hours, then this again, so I'll talk about this in terms of the both re-listens at once for the sake of it. Dawn FM is okay. The general soundscape of it doesn't fully click for me. There's a couple of songs that are really great. It does have some of those more iconic moments like what I would expect from The Weeknd, but the overall general average of it is nowhere near as high as either of the other two albums in the trilogy, in my opinion. Less Than Zero and Take My Breath are the two best songs on here by a long shot. It's not even close, and it's also funny because those are the two songs that could most easily fit on like After Hours, for example. Although Phantom Regret by Jim, admittedly as a closer, as an epilogue, kind of pairs with Less Than Zero. Those two back to back are like one of the best things from the Weeknd that I've personally listened to, and I haven't listened to a lot, I will admit that, but aside from a couple of songs, which ironically could also have sort of fit on a different record almost, Dawn FM's just kind of okay. I'm going to give it 2 stars because I generally just don't enjoy the album. Maybe 2.5. Yeah, we'll say 2.5 because the first re-listen of this that I did, I enjoyed it a good bit. The second re-listen that I did, I enjoyed it less, actually, than I did the first re-listen because I had done it just after Hours and made me realize just how disappointing this album is relatively. So it's kind of a weird dichotomy that fits there, but because I've been talking about After Hours, we'll go ahead and talk about it again now. After Hours is basically a perfect album. There was the part of me that was wondering, how would I rate this? Like, what would I actually say about After Hours in this video? And it comes down to the emotional connection of this thing is just superb. I was not having a great time in my life around the time that I first came to be familiar with this record in 2020, early 2020. And through like the rest of that whole year, I listened to this thing so many times. I think if I were to take my most listened album over the entirety of 2020, After Hours might just be that album. That is how much of a connection it had for me. And even the aspects about it that I don't love quite as much, the moments that don't fully hit for me, or the moments that feel a little bit more indulgent, or that typically I wouldn't enjoy, or even that the first couple of times I listened to the album I didn't like, I have no issues with it. Like listening to it all again in full, being in that Weeknd mood again this week, it's basically a perfect album. And when you combine just how perfect I feel like it is with the emotional connection that I have to it, I basically have to give this a 5 out of 5, even if there's like a tiny little bit of me that would almost prefer to give it 4 out of 5 and be like, oh yeah, I acknowledge there's maybe some flaws or some aspects that I don't fully connect to every time I listen to it, but like, it's 5 out of 5. I absolutely recommend After Hours, if I could spell. I always have this problem, especially the deluxe version. And I do say that pointedly because I'm pretty sure the only version of this record that I ever really listened to was with the bonus tracks in context. And I couldn't imagine listening to the standard version only through Until I Bleed Out and not having the last 3 tracks on there in comparison. So, you know, that's what I'm going to go ahead and rate After Hours. But wait, there's more. We have one more album to talk to, which is an instrumental album that's kind of in that sort of vibey prog metal type thing, but it's also got some like prog rock in there. You could call this post rock to some degree, but it's a little bit it's got a little bit more technicality in there that I feel like a lot of prog rock tends to have. I don't really know the technicalities with how a lot of instrumental metal music would typically fall in. This isn't super heavy though, I will say. We Are Trees is a classic. I think actually the full album stream of this has a ton of views on YouTube, for example. It's one that probably plenty of people are familiar with to some degree. I really wish these guys had ever put out like any other record in the time since. It's been 7.5 years and no word from them. Which is unfortunate, but the album itself is really, really great. It's one of my favorite instrumental albums. I say that about a lot of instrumental albums, though, but I'm going to go ahead and give this 4.5 out of 5 and say I heartily recommend We Are Trees. I made multiple spelling mistakes all course of this. That's mildly embarrassing, but that's okay. I really enjoy this record. I think the songs that are a little bit darker in the naming are harder to listen to, like Anxiety, Despair, Phobia even, are noticeably more anxiety inducing or something like that than some of the other songs, but like Your Wave Caresses Me, The Train from the Return of Thunder through Euphoria is just fantastic. The Frozen Moment is a great closer as well. If you enjoy instrumental music to any degree, even if you don't love metal, but if you're watching these videos, you probably like metal to some degree, We Are Trees is really great. It's just kind of a vibe. If you enjoy a vibey album, this is going to satisfy really, really well. But I'm pretty sure that is the end of this episode and all that I have to talk about this week. This episode's a little bit longer than I was anticipating it being, that's for sure, but thank you for watching it if you did. If any of these records or any of these other songs you listened to over the course of the week, shout out in the comments below, tell me what you thought about any of them. And also consider checking out my Musicboard profile to see the full reviews or whatever else I listen to in the meantime. I would really appreciate that. Like I said, thank you again for watching. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe, but you can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys next week.